Have you ever paused mid-news clip and thought, wait, what just happened there? That split-second jolt, that's exactly what happened to Maria when she first heard the headline, Japan gives 6 warships to the Philippines. It sounded almost unreal. Why would a prosperous nation like Japan, with its own long history of pacifism, lend, or gift, such potent symbols of military power to another country? It knocked her off balance, and with that very shock, her heart leaned in. Maria lives in Quezon City. She spent most of her adult life raising 2 children, working as a school librarian, cherishing weekends filled with church, family dinners, karaoke nights echoing with laughter. Warships weren't exactly dinner-table conversation. Yet suddenly she found herself staring at her TV screen as though it held a hidden message meant personally for her. Why would a friendly nation do something so unexpected? She asked aloud, though her husband was quietly reading the evening paper. She imagined him glancing up, curious, sensing that whatever she'd just seen had unsettled her. That voice inside, so familiar, wanted to protect, to question, to understand. This is where our story gently begins, with a question, a nudging of the comfortable, an invitation to look closer. What if the story we've taken for granted, one of alliance, aid, and strategic maneuvering, in fact carries a human heartbeat underneath? What if behind 6 warships lies a narrative of hope and cautious transformation? And could that matter so deeply to someone like Maria, someone whose life revolves around nurturing, community, faith? I invite you to walk alongside her. Maria leans forward when another broadcast rolls in, this time with images of sleek hulls cutting through the water, camouflaged against a dawn that seems to tremble with promise and tension. The vessels are unfamiliar to her. They are more than steel. In her mind's eye, they represent power, sovereignty, perhaps even looming threat. Yet the anchor of her instincts, her lifetime of teaching her students empathy, whispers that there might be more beneath this surface than meets the eye. In its own restrained way, this news clip delivers a micro-shock. 6 warships. It hits us not with dramatics, no heartbeat-doubling explosions, but a quiet reversal of expectation. Japan, historically cautious about military force, suddenly stepping into a role where it cements defense partnerships. And then there's the Philippines, so often cast in global conversations as the recipient, the weaker neighbor, the one hoping for help. That this time it's receiving not just aid, but tools capable of asserting presence, that quietly unsettles Maria, and quite possibly many of us. For a moment she envisions a classroom scene, children clustered around the globe, pointing at photos of ships this size, their eyes wide, the world becoming both familiar and strange. In that moment she feels the story ripple, not just affecting armies or politicians, but curious minds, young hearts. She realizes that the stakes of this transfer reach far beyond naval bases. They brush up against identity, sovereignty, regional balance, and on a more intimate level, what it means to feel safe, to belong, to carry the unexpected. Her phone chimes with messages from colleagues she respects, asking the same, "Have you seen this? Is this good or bad?" More voices nudging the edges of her comfort. She's not alone in sensing that something bigger is at work. Over her evening coffee, she reads social media threads, debating if this is about security against a looming threat or Japan quietly bolstering regional stability. And the word secret keeps creeping in. Secret agenda. Secret motives. Suddenly she feels pulled into a murmur she didn't expect to join, but which she can't ignore. In its own subtle way, that phrase, secret agenda, puts an emotional charge into play. It's not a conspiracy evening of shock, but a whisper that says, there is more here. And that whisper sparks questions. What might those be? Strategic? Political? Past wrongs being quietly balanced? Or is this about something deeper? Shared values, shared fears, shared faith in each other? Maria doesn't know yet, but she's begun to feel the stirrings of something akin to awakening. And so our journey embarks, not through battlefronts or policy papers, but through Maria's awakening. She isn't a diplomat. She's an everyday woman whose life is shaped by story and community. Yet she senses that this gift of warships might be both literal and symbolic. Symbolic of trust, of uneasy peace, and of change. In her imagination, she pictures 3 women. Herself, a Japanese mother she's never met, and perhaps a Filipino naval officer whose face she saw in the news. Unconnected yet bound by this act. They stand on different shores as the sun breaks over the vigilant ships, wondering what this moment will mean for their children, their communities. Maria takes a deep breath and decides she will not let this story pass as another headline. She will look closer. She will ask questions, and in doing so, she hopes to find something more than politics. She hopes to find meaning. Is this about deterrence, about healing old scars? A turning point, quietly. She isn't certain, but she knows she wants to understand, and perhaps believe. And just as the ships themselves sail forward into seas still unnamed in her mind, so too does her curiosity set course. There is a journey ahead, a journey that will weave through policy whispers, memories of war and alliances, stories of resilience, and the pulse of everyday lives, culminating in a new understanding of who we are and who we might become when surprises arrive from unexpected places. I haven't told you everything yet. I've simply asked you to lean in, to feel the shift, as Maria has. Our next step will take us deeper, into the sea of history, into narratives of friendship and war, into voices that once resounded and now whisper, waiting to be heard. For now, rest with the question, with the unease, with the quiet opening of something unexpected. And then, when you're ready, we'll begin to unravel what lies beyond Japan gives 6 warships to the Philippines. Let's return to Maria, just a few days after that headline first broke. The news cycle had moved on, but she hadn't. There was something in that quiet phrase, 6 warships, that stayed with her. It wasn't about the number. It wasn't even really about Japan or the ships. It was about what they represented. And the more she thought about it, the more she began to realize this wasn't just a donation. It was a question being asked of the Philippines, and perhaps of her too. To most people, Maria looked the same. She still showed up at her library on time, still led her Saturday Bible study with the grace and warmth she was known for. But inside, something had begun to stir. It wasn't political curiosity, exactly. It was personal. For someone who had lived her life believing in the power of books, of lessons, of quiet resilience, this gesture from Japan challenged what she thought she knew about strength. Could power and peace exist side by side? Could a nation that once brought war to our shores now stand guard alongside us? The question pulled her inward. So she started paying attention, not just to the headlines, but to the undercurrents. And it was during one ordinary walk through her neighborhood that something shifted. There's a sari-sari store just around the corner from her house. It's small, cluttered, the kind of place where children argue over which candy to buy, and old men gather to complain about the weather. That day, Maria saw something unusual. 2 men, quietly standing at the corner, speaking in soft Japanese. Tourists, perhaps, but one of them, an older man in his 70s, was holding a small framed photo. Maria, curious, leaned closer as she passed. The man was showing the photo to the storekeeper, an old black and white image of a young Filipino man in uniform, standing beside what looked like a World War II aircraft. The moment lasted only seconds. But Maria felt her steps slow. The old man smiled gently, pointed to the photo, then to his own heart, and finally bowed. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, but there was a reverence in it that stopped her. The storekeeper, unsure what to do, simply nodded, then pressed his hand to his chest in return. Maria didn't speak to them, but she carried that image home like a stone in her pocket. An apology? A memory? A silent thank you? She didn't know. But for the first time, the idea of Japan's gift, the Warships, felt less like politics and more like something deeply human. Perhaps the giving was not just about alliance or defense. Perhaps it was about redemption, about trust slowly earned. The second moment came at school. One of Maria's students had borrowed a book about Asia-Pacific maritime history. The boy, only 12, came back after a week and asked her, "Ma'am, why did we let ourselves get pushed around so much?" His voice wasn't angry. It was confused, honest. That kind of question, so simple, so raw, pierced through her carefully maintained neutrality. Maria sat with him, let the question breathe. Then she told him, "Sometimes people mistake kindness for weakness, but real strength, it comes from knowing who you are and not forgetting." She didn't know where the words came from, but after she said them, she felt something settle. The past didn't need to be erased. It just needed to be understood. And perhaps that's what these ships were about. Not a show of force, but a reminder that history can bend, and old wounds can shape new futures. Then came the third moment, a quieter one still. Maria was alone at home, scrolling late at night. She came across a video of the Japanese ambassador to the Philippines delivering a short message. It wasn't grand, no subtitles, no dramatic music, just him, speaking calmly in practiced Tagalog. He talked about friendship, about mutual respect, about standing by each other. But there was one sentence that caught her off guard. "Ang lakas ay hindi laging nakikita. Minsan, ito'y tahimik, matiyaga, at totoo." Strength is not always seen. Sometimes it is quiet, patient, and true. Maria stared at the screen for a long time after. She wasn't sure why it hit her. Perhaps it was the Tagalog. Perhaps it was how sincere he looked. Perhaps it was just that she needed to hear that message herself. Whatever it was, she felt something shift again. Not dramatically, not like a crashing wave, but more like the slow turn of a tide. And in that stillness, Maria understood something. These warships, they were not just Japan's gesture. They were a mirror held up to the Philippines. To its past, yes, but also to its dignity, to its strength that had too often been underestimated. They were a question, but also a promise. We see you. We trust you. Will you trust yourselves? Maria didn't have all the answers, but in that moment, she no longer looked at those ships with suspicion. She looked at them with something close to hope, maybe even pride. A cautious pride, yes, but pride nonetheless. And just like that, her journey had shifted. What began as a reaction had become reflection. What felt like fear had turned into understanding. And what once was only about nations was now also about people. People remembering, people healing, people beginning again. We're not done yet. There's more to unfold. More layers, more truth, more heart. In the next part of Maria's story, we'll begin to explore what lies beneath these geopolitical currents, the fears, the faith, the future, and what it truly means for a country like the Philippines to stand not behind, but beside. Let me know when you're ready to continue. Maria had never been one for politics. Her world was made of books, soft-spoken children, and prayers whispered over steaming pots of sinigang. But ever since those quiet moments, the old Japanese man with a photo, her student's earnest question, the ambassador's voice breaking through her screen, she found herself leaning toward stories she used to scroll past. It wasn't just about curiosity anymore. Something deeper was shifting. Something personal. What does it mean to be strong? That question followed her, unspoken, as news of the warships continued to ripple through Philippine society. Analysts debated their specifications, politicians made statements, strategists mapped out naval routes. But for Maria, strength had always meant something else, something invisible, but deeply felt. She thought of her own grandfather, who never spoke about the war but flinched whenever a jeepney backfired. She remembered how he would sit by the window some nights, as though keeping watch, even decades after peace had supposedly returned. He had seen Japanese planes overhead once, and now, in this new time, Japanese ships would stand guard on Philippine waters. The symmetry of that stirred something uneasy in her. And yet, that's where the real transformation began, not in rejecting the past, but in wrestling with it. One Sunday, after Mass, Maria sat with her daughter Camille at a small cafe. The young woman, now studying political science at university, was full of opinions and questions, always challenging, always probing. They rarely talked about military things, but today it surfaced. "Ma," Camille asked, "do you think we should accept those ships?" Maria stirred her coffee slowly. "Do I think we need them? I don't know, but maybe the better question is, what does it mean that they're being offered?" Camille raised an eyebrow. "You mean Japan wants something?" "No," Maria said, then paused. "I mean, maybe they believe in us. Maybe they think we're worth defending." It was the first time she'd said it out loud. The idea felt both fragile and profound. And Camille, who usually came with rebuttals, said nothing. She just looked at her mother with a kind of quiet respect Maria wasn't expecting. That was when Maria realized the shift wasn't only happening in her. It was generational. Her daughter didn't carry the war in her bones. She didn't remember blackouts or ration lines or the sound of stories spoken in hushed tones. She had grown up in a different Philippines, louder, prouder, more assertive. And maybe that was the point. Maybe this was the moment when the past didn't have to be forgotten to be transformed. A few days later, Maria walked to the bay, where families gathered to watch the sunset over Manila. She hadn't done this in years. But something had drawn her there. Something about the water, the open horizon, the idea that somewhere beyond the curve of the sea, those ships were sailing toward them, not to conquer, not to rescue, but to stand beside. She saw children playing with toy boats near the shoreline. One boy raised a small plastic ship into the air, shouting, "This one is from Japan, but it fights for us now." It was such a simple moment, so ordinary, but to Maria, it was holy. That child wasn't burdened by the past. He didn't see enemies or victims. He saw partnership, protection, possibility, and that's when Maria felt something break open in her, a release of an old ache she hadn't realized she'd been carrying. She thought about how the Philippines had always been seen, by others, sometimes by its own people, as small, as dependent, as soft. But here, now, in this moment of change, perhaps that narrative was being rewritten. Not with noise, but with quiet agreements. Not with force, but with recognition. 6 ships, 6 symbols, not of war, but of a new kind of strength, one that grows from humility, from shared history, from the bravery to trust again. As the sky turned gold and violet, Maria whispered a prayer, not for victory, not for power, but for peace and for the wisdom to recognize when old enemies become new friends and when a gift, no matter how strange, might be a doorway to healing. the journey is not over. One final current remains. In our last part, we'll look deeper into what this gesture means for the region, for Japan, and for the soul of the Philippines. Is there truly a secret agenda? Or is the truth something even more powerful, an invitation to rise together? By the time the first of the 6 Japanese vessels entered Philippine waters, the headlines had already shifted to new crises, new noise. But Maria watched it unfold in real time, sitting beside her husband as evening news cameras zoomed in on gray steel silhouettes cutting across the sea. There was no military fanfare, no fireworks, just the quiet thrum of engines and the eerie, majestic calm of a ship making its way home, not to Japan, but to the Philippines. Something about that image felt final. And yet, also, like a beginning. Maria had spent weeks turning this moment over in her heart, layering it with memories, questions, even small doubts. But now, as the ships arrived, a strange peace settled over her. Not the kind born of certainty, but the kind that comes when the soul agrees to carry complexity without fear. Because it was complex. These warships, after all, came from a country that once invaded our shores. A country whose planes once flew dark over the very islands these ships now vow to defend. But this was also the country that rebuilt itself from ash, that embraced pacifism, and now, without shedding blood or demanding praise, offered protection, not just in hardware, but in gesture, in shared belief. To some, it still looked like strategy, to others, like diplomacy wrapped in steel. But to Maria, it had become something else, a reflection of how the Philippines is seen, and how it could choose to see itself. She remembered a time when aid always felt like rescue, when bigger nations handed over resources with a tone that hovered somewhere between pity and power. But this didn't feel like that. Japan wasn't offering a lifeline, it was offering partnership, a seat at the table, a recognition that the Philippines wasn't a pawn, but a player, perhaps even a friend. And in the stillness of that understanding, Maria's old fears quietly faded. In the weeks that followed, conversations shifted. Her students asked questions not about invasion, but about responsibility. "Ma'am," one boy asked, "if we're given ships like that, what are we expected to do?" The question struck her. Because it wasn't about politics. It was about identity. And perhaps that's what had changed most in Maria. Not her opinion, but her sense of where she stood in the world. For years, she had viewed global affairs as a tide too vast, too distant, too tangled. But now she saw the ripple. She saw how the arrival of 6 ships could shake old wounds awake, could bridge nations, could spark dialogue between generations. But still, some wondered. Was there a catch? Was this Japan's quiet re-entry into militarization? A message to other powers watching the Pacific? Or was it something subtler? A reaffirmation of friendship not written in speeches but in steel? Maria didn't know. And perhaps no one truly did. But maybe that was the point. Because trust isn't forged in certainty. It's built in the small, steady steps taken after fear. It's built in the courage to believe again, despite history's scars. And if there was a secret agenda behind Japan's gift, maybe it wasn't about power or politics. Maybe it was about restoration, of dignity, of memory, of alliance. She thought of her grandfather again, of the silence he carried, the pain he never named. And now, decades later, here stood his granddaughter, not silenced by fear, but strengthened by understanding. He had fought so she could live free. And now she lived in a world where former enemies could stand side by side, not in bitterness, but in belief. Maria understood now. These ships were not Japan's way of rearming, but of returning, not to conquer, but to connect. And in that connection, something beautiful emerged. The Philippines, so often underestimated, had been offered something not just strategic, but sacred: trust. Not all gifts come in wrapping we recognize, and not all peace is signed in ink. Sometimes peace arrives quietly, through an old man's photo in a sari-sari store, through a child's toy boat held high on the shore, through a voice on a screen speaking your language, not to impress but to belong, through warships cutting across the sea, not as a threat but as a promise. Maria stood by the bay once more, days after the ships had docked. The horizon stretched endless, the sky held no answers. But the sea, oh, the sea, whispered something true. That healing doesn't come with headlines. It comes with the courage to hope, to remember, to rise. And as the waves rolled in, she smiled, not with certainty, but with faith. Faith that maybe, just maybe, the world was changing. And this time, the Philippines would not be left behind. It would stand, shoulders square, heart open, waters watched, not alone, but with allies, with dignity, and with quiet strength that needed no applause, just presence, just peace. And that is where we leave her, Maria, the librarian, the mother, the watcher of tides, standing at the edge of a story still unfolding. A story of ships, yes, but also of souls. Yours, mine, ours, the Philippines. Never just a small country, always a strong people, always worth believing in. If this story moved you, if Maria's quiet transformation helped you see the Philippines in a new light, then don't keep it to yourself. Like, share, and most importantly, subscribe. Because here, we don't just tell news, we uncover the heart behind the headlines. Stories of dignity, of faith, of the Filipino spirit rising where the world least expects it. And if you believe, like Maria now does, that the Philippines is not just waiting to be protected but ready to stand strong, then join us. This isn't just a channel, it's a movement. And the next story might just be yours.